I would like to now invite our four discussants, and I hope each one of you will talk for 15 minutes. And so that afterwards, then we would also have some questions or comments from our other participants. And then we will request our two speakers to make some responses. So now I would like to invite Ebrima Sall. He's now working on Trust Africa in Senegal, and he is previously the Executive Secretary of the Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa, that is the CODESRIA. And we know that the CODESRIA was founded by Sami Amin. And CODESRIA is also one of the leading independent social research councils of the Global South. So, Ebrima, please.
Thank you very much, Kinchi, and hello, everybody. Thank you to our excellent speakers, Gustavo and Sainath. I'd like to thank the organizers and congratulate Kinchi, Margaret, Laisung, and the whole organizing team for this excellent forum. And for all, thank you for all the work that you've put into it. Look, and obviously Professor Wen and all the people who have been part of this initiative from the first time. I had the privilege of being at the very first forum, and it's extremely impressive to see how the thing has grown, including under these difficult circumstances. It gives hope that actually there's a future for this world, because there's a future for the struggles as well. The two speakers have really, brought out extremely important issues. The theme being that of the future of humanity and alternatives to capitalism. I want to begin with something that a Senegalese philosopher, Souleymane Bachir Diagne, who said in a recent short piece on COVID-19 and the responses, titled "The Song of Damascus." And in that piece, he reminded us of a Wolof saying. Wolof is a language that is spoken in Senegal and in some parts of West Africa and Gambia and elsewhere. And the saying goes, the solutions to the problems that a human being has is in other human beings, right? Nitai Garabam. That is the solution, the remedy to the problems of a human being are in other human beings. And then there's a variant of that same saying that says, the remedy to the problems of a human being are in being more humane, right? Yeah, more humane. If you extend it to humanity as a whole, it would be like the solutions to the problems of humanity are in some kind of enhanced humanism. Basically, I would argue, and this is because, it is in line with the philosophy that is prevalent in most African societies. You see yourself as part of a collective, right? I am because you are. That's what Ubuntu philosophy says in Southern Africa. It has variants in many parts of Africa, but it says, I am because you are. It is a relationship of solidarity, of common humanity, of shared humanity, which is the note on which our second speaker ended. It is a relationship, obviously, that is mutually self-reinforcing, mutually self-dignifying, and a relationship that is obviously not of exploitation. And therefore, it is the opposite of what capitalism has become and has been all the time. That therefore would be the future for humanity at the end of the day. I think the problem, talking about the remedy, is we have to have an idea of what the problem has been. And the problem has been capitalism and capitalist exploitation, and how it has evolved over time. All the different phases: imperialism, neoliberal globalization, and everything that we've had discussed extremely powerfully by our two speakers. And I think the point that Sainath made in terms of COVID-19 being a moment of some kind of an autopsy, a post-mortem of capitalism, has been it's a powerful metaphor, I think, because it has brought out all the problems of capitalism, the inequality, the growing inequalities, the marginalization, all the different ways in which humanity has been sort of put upside down in the way it is. We knew already that capitalism was responsible for all the problems we have with the environment, with problems of climate change, all the disasters that we know that are said to be human-made are actually closely related to the system that has been in place all along. I think the remedy to that problem is therefore one of an enhanced form of humanity and of humanism, let me say, superior forms of humanism, which definitely will not be androcentrist. In other words, we want a humanism that is not taking the human being as the be all and end all of everything, and turning the environment, turning nature, turning everything in society as having to serve human beings. And that has been one of the characteristics of dominant models that have brought us all the problems we have with the environment. It is also definitely not, and certainly not a Western centrist or a Eurocentrist humanism, which has been what we have also been sort of brought to live under for many years. Not exploitative, not male dominated, and certainly not capital centrist. I think the fundamental questions that society has been confronted with all along has been how to organize society. We have tried capitalism, we've seen what it has done, and I think at the end of the day, it is something definitely that is to be separated from the future of humanity if you want humanity to survive even. And it is therefore a question of moving out of capitalist globalization. I like the powerful statement that the first speaker made about capitalism being dead already. And we are just seeing actually maybe the last struggles of it, and but again, this first speaker, Gustavo, also said that the bifurcation that has characterized the relationships that exist between those promoting socialism and capitalist forces and those struggling against capitalism is still here and is still continuing. So in a sense, I think these last moments of capitalism we have to live through them over a long haul. It is not something that's going to go away anytime soon, because capitalism historically has had the capacity to reproduce itself and regenerate itself in extremely innovative forms, and I think it will fight to its last breath, and it has to be literally finished off for it to disappear completely. And the good thing is we have seen in the struggles of the people, as both speakers have highlighted, the fact that there are I think the resources exist, the movements have been fighting, alternative forms of organization exist, different ways of organizing, different options exist, to use the colonial language. And therefore, although we know that the outcomes of that struggle of the bifurcated forces is uncertain, it's unpredictable, as the first speaker rightly said, what we want to do is to push in the direction that we want the outcomes to go. In other words, what is already in the new that is already among us in society, quoting Untitled Roy, I think that was a very, very good quote by this first speaker. How do we nurture the new and the emerging? How do we make sure that that becomes the dominant force, that becomes the dominant system going forward, even if you don't have a name for it yet? I was a bit rattled by what the first speaker said about us not having the intellectual tools to characterize the new. I think I took it as an invitation to invest harder in thinking and in reflecting on, what is it that we are going to call this emerging force, and not just use terms that have been around for a long time. If you're talking about socialism, how do we understand the kind of socialism that is needed? If you're talking about another system, including humanism, I'm referring to, how do we understand it? That's what I understood from the statement. But I think the challenge of us mobilizing all the intellectual resources we have to have a deep understanding of what is happening, and a deep understanding of what is emerging and on the kind of world we want to build is an important point. Some of the other issues that have been raised, I want to go through very quickly. In this struggle, I think the point about there have been no Bastilles to seize, and that the first speaker made, is very important. In the French language, there's this whole idea of a grand soir. There will come a moment when, one major move, one major act will turn the scales, and then the victory will follow. I think the idea that what is required is a profound transformation process that will be at every level is a very important point. Secondly, what will be the sort of the fundamental principle on which all these struggles could be hinged and organized. The whole issue of justice, I think, that was a very important point that was made by the second speaker. Justice in its different aspects is climate justice. We're talking about gender justice. We're talking about social justice, economic justice. But definitely, justice should be a foundational element of the new society that is emerging, the post-capitalist society that will be ecological, it will be people-centered, it will be grounded on, on all these other aspects of justice, and it will have to be emancipatory. And therefore, I think what we are talking about is a new kind of an enhanced form of humanism that should lead to the creation of new futures, not only for humanity, but also for planet Earth and its inhabitants. We're talking about the elements of that new civilization, in effect. Samir Amin, in one of his papers, talked about development in a sense, not in the way it's being used, inclusive, and all the adjectives that are used to sort of qualify it, as the last speaker said, which in effect actually do not take us out of the system and its problems, but as something that is, in a sense, leading to the creation of a new civilization. In that sense, I think we are talking about here, the alternative to capitalism would be the building of a new civilization. A civilization in which actually, I will borrow a sentence that is in a charter that's called the Monday Charter that was adopted in the 13th century in what is present-day Mali in West Africa. The Monday Charter, the article number 1 of the Monday Charter is, every life is a life. Every life is a life. This is about life, human life. It's about, animal life. It's about life on Earth more generally. And the Charter was adopted, at the end of a very bitter struggle and a protracted struggle to end slavery already in the 13th century, and to restore equality and justice in relationships between men and women, between human beings and animals, between human beings and the environment, between strangers and foreigners and people who are residents of the country. And I think this is just to say that we have actually, in the histories of our societies and of our communities, elements of the life that we are aspiring to, that will make us more human, that will make us, that will give more, help us create a more ecological and sustainable civilization going forward. Now, different ways of characterizing it have been made, from Marx and Engels to Sheikh Job and Samir Amin and others have attempted to characterize that new future. I think it will remain a challenge for intellectuals, for everybody. But that new world will not come out of the work of intellectuals alone, it will come out of the struggles. And we see a renewed interest in imagining those futures, from books written by scholars to even Hollywood movies, some of which, like Black Panther, have tried to characterize a new future. In the case of Africa, that will be completely different. I think at the end of the day, what we are looking at is the future for humanity that will be determined by the outcomes of this struggle, but the outcomes of this struggle are uncertain for now, and we have to, the better we are organized, and I think that's the important point here, the better social forces are organized across the globe, and in that sense, this forum is an important contribution, I believe. The better we come to a shared understanding of what the new world we are aspiring to, the better we are able to end the capitalist system that has been the source of all the problems. The second thing I want to say is the point about normalization and the new normal. I think there is no new normal, no normal to go back to, and the new normal is actually a non-normal. We don't want it. We don't want to build back to anything. We want to build forward into something that's new. And in that sense, Roy has used a beautiful expression as the pandemic, among other things, being a portal for transitioning into a new world. And going into that new world, we leave behind everything that we don't want. The last point I want to make is that the concept of solidarity has been used by the second speaker. I think it's an extremely important concept. It is, in a sense, it brings me back to what I was saying about humanity being something that has to be lived together. It is not an individual exercise. It has to do with commons. It has to do with a shared, experience of life, and a shared, interest in life, and a shared, relationship that is mutually reinforcing. And that is what we come to envision from the level of a country to a nation. I think the points about the nation state and its problems are very, very important. We need to imagine something completely different ways of organizing at that level, but also at the global level, a world that is certainly much better and that is governed in much better ways. Let me just stop here, not to take more than the 15 minutes that I've been allowed to take.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ebrima. So I will now invite Paris Yeros. He's professor of the Faculties of Economic Sciences, Sciences and Humanities, and World Political Economy at the Federal University of ABC at Sao Paulo, Brazil. And he's also editor of the journal Agrarian South, Journal of Political Economy. So, Paris, please.
Thank you very much for organizing this wonderful event. Kinchi, also Jadi, Tui, Jadi, as we call her here in Brazil. Also the whole organization of the team and the team that has brought us together. It's a really a remarkable event. It's also a great pleasure to be in the of friends that I've known for a long time and new friends that I've met just today. Our eminent speakers, Gustavo and Sainath. It was very pleasure to listen to you, what you have to say, where we are going. My brief are focused more on some of the perspectives of, but maybe in an attempt to resume and extract some of the main elements that are the building blocks of the coming decades. First, as has been noted, we are at the end of a 500-year-old system. I think we need to choose that systems beginning, and middle, and an end, and 500 years is a full life, a long time for economic system, which is capital. It has there's no future for it. It's completely, entirely exhausted. It has nothing to contribute to human civilization, and it is since the 20th century. In fact, it has been in full decay. Two events I think we need to keep in mind, two big events that of the 20th century, which marked the beginning of the end of the system, is first the generalized process of political decolonization. Capitalism grew through colonial rule over 450 years, and the full 20th century took that away, that political pillar took that away from capitalism. So that was a shock to the system. At the same time, there were social revolutions which spread and were in fact with these national liberation movements. And the social revolutions experimented economic and social systems that would go beyond capitalism. So this is also very new, because all social struggles prior to this had very weak notions of what the other society would be like. So the phone is ringing suddenly, but let me just sorry. So these two events really put an end to the way the system has been working. Now, this has coincided with the long crisis of capitalism, which started in the 1960s, and since then has never recuperated. Profit margins at the centers, in the productive sectors of the system, in the center of the system, have been in decline since the 1960s. They've oscillated here and there, but generally they have been in decline, and the system has not been able to recuperate profits in the productive sectors. What it has done is to recreate a profit system through the financial system to compensate for profits, and also escalate on primitive accumulation. So that is what has marked the last 50 years or more. the system is a very aggressive, system that has last legs. Now, this has, this system has been called many things. I prefer to use Kwame Nkrumah's characterization of the system as a neocolonial transition. Yeah, the liberation movements and the convulsions of the 20th century did not lead to a decolonized, fully decolonized situation. There was a transition to a neocolonial system, which, as Nkrumah had foreseen, took us to a new level of danger for human civilization. And this is where we are today. Some of the issues, the type of Gustavo, a few papers circulates, and I think he was very correct in his analysis of how democracy has been emptied out. Yeah, we have great modern constitutions, everyone has rights, but we are ruled by the law against us. So this is the type of decolonization that has occurred. And in the Americas, especially in the last decades, there has been an escalation of violence and mass incarceration to put the Americas once again, at the center of the violence map of the world. This is explained. It has the New World as a whole has, of course, is where the great genocides happen, and this is a new chapter since the 1990s, 2000s, a new chapter in the genocidal project that started 500 years ago. This really marks, and if we look at Brazil in the 2000s, since then the mass incarceration and the death rates escalated in the best years, supposedly, of the Workers' Party governments. That's when it all happened. This applies to the Caribbean. This applies to Central America, Mexico has its own spiral of violence. So this is a type of situation which we have been in for a long time. Some of in our network, we have been trying to systematize a bit how in our understanding of these peripheral social formations. There is a tendency to see this process of formation of a society which is extremely different, very different from any society that has existed before. These are semi-permanized social formations where people have been expelled entirely or partly from the countryside, but have not been proletarians, nor have they been exported to some distant land to become landowners or other types of laborers. So what Britain and other countries were able to do in settling other countries, other territories and peoples and expelling peoples, today is not actually what is happening. There has been a huge reserve that has been building of the system, and it is marginal to the process of accumulation. It is fundamental to it. Half workforce, this is according to ILO data, half of the world's workforce lives in informal economies. The precarious relationship to wage labor, it's irregular, it's partial, it's insecure. They're not full proletarians in that sense, even if they have left the countryside. The big types of labor, categories of labor, are labor for own account, people are autonomous, small enterprise owners of various types in the service sectors, There's family labor category, and of course reproductive labor, which is unaccounted for by the market, and that is the underlying type of labor for the whole system to reproduce itself. If we include in this half of the world's workforce the dependents of the workforce, because the workforce is of those able to work, of age to work, if we add the dependents, the youth and the old, we are clearly talking of the bulk of the world's population that reproduces itself in a degraded way at the margins of capital. We are talking of a workforce that is very diverse. We're talking about peasants, contract farmers, seasonal agricultural workers, fisher folk, informal urban workers, service delivery workers in the gig economy, home-based workers, domestic workers, domestic and foreign migrants, indigenous, quilombola, and other traditional peoples. This is the reality our societies on the peripheries of the system. Over 2/3 of this semi-proletarianized workforce comprises of women. Almost 3/4, in fact. Almost 3/4 of this workforce comprises of women. This is a characteristic that emerges clearly, in fact, in the social struggles. If trade unions in the industrial sectors, for example, were male-dominated political forms, today land occupations, whether they're urban, rural, and the social struggles that emerge from this type of society, women have much more direct participation and often leadership roles. Another aspect of this type of society are the rural-urban linkages. Of course, the South is diverse itself. Africa and Asia are still in their majorities rural. The populations it's around 60% rural, 40% urban. Whereas in Latin America, it's much more urban. But despite these variations, the rural-urban linkages remain strong. And even where populations have become more urbanized, it doesn't mean that the weight of politics has shifted entirely to the urban areas. In Brazil, 75% of the population around there is considered urban by our statisticians. But the biggest movement for the last 30 years in Brazil is the rural landless movement. Of course, there's urban landless movement and so forth, but it doesn't mean that urbanization takes the rural out of politics. It actually has in fact escalated rural mobilization. So that is some of the main elements of the type of society which have emerged over this period in the South. Now, just three further questions. That there's a land question which is extremely important to this type of society. Given that people that have been expelled away entirely or partially, given that they have not been absorbed into a formal economy, they face a crisis of social reproduction. And one of the key objects of struggle is land. This is for rural areas and urban areas. So it is not, again, in the case of Brazil, odd that Brazilian modernity is characterized by the biggest movements are rural landless and urban landless. Now, this is not something you will find in Europe. Other forms of organized protest occur there. But here, this is the landless movements are central to Brazilian politics. Extends to questions of autonomy for indigenous people, quilombolas, and other traditional societies, production and autonomy in the control of living life forms, have also gained political traction. Yeah. And this is quite apart from the agrarian question. The land question passes across all these territories and regions, and is quite and interacts with an agrarian question. But the agrarian question is conceptually apart. This is, in our view, the way we have seen the question of national liberation, agriculture, and natural resources must be retaken, reclaimed for a liberation project. It's not for one food security or this or food that, or it has agriculture and natural resources must be retaken, reclaimed for a liberation project to be made concrete. This means that this includes food sovereignty, of course, but more largely must be put to the service of a collective self-reliance on a regional basis, where the use of natural resources are decided regionally, where agricultural production can be channeled to own industrial concerns, and where technological development can serve own agricultural requirements, specifically for sustainability. So these are some of the issues that need to concern us as we move ahead. As far as the future of humanity, it is a question of liberation from this old system. Self-reliance is required in various levels, including large regions across the South. If the 20th century was of development as urbanization, the 21st century has to be some form of representization. Now, this means effectively finding a new equilibrium between town and country, and even means moving people, providing opportunities for people to move back to have full lives, dignified lives in rural areas. Representization means finding new equilibrium in demographic proportions, also in economic functions. It was novel that urban agriculture has become so important. Many cities around the world and in the Caribbean, this is one of the most brilliant examples. So the rural areas have to gain autonomy through cooperatives, capacity for own processing, industrial production, and so forth, as well as agricultural functions have to become part of urban areas as well. Social reproduction is a fundamental aspect of any transition. This epidemic has shown that these semi-proletarianized social formations are in a permanent crisis of social reproduction. Yeah. So any kind of transition of the immediate social reproduction in healthcare, in proper education, and so forth. Natural resources, it is has already been mentioned. I will not dwell on this. There has to be a way going forward for yes, I'm finishing up. And also, of course, new forms of property, which mean new mix of state, collective, cooperative forms of property, and a new relationship with the commons. Now, this is the basics of a transition beyond the capitalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Paris. So now I'd like to invite Margo Okazawa-Rey, she's a professor at the San Francisco State University in the United States. Her primary areas of research is the interconnected in interconnections of militarism, capitalism, and religious fundamentalism, and their impacts on women. And she has worked in East Asia, in West Africa, and also in Palestine. She's also a member of the International Board of Peace Women across the globe in Bern, Switzerland. And in that, we have been working together for these last 15 years on the question of promoting peace among women in the world. So, Margo, please.
Thank you very much, Kinchi, and thanks to all the speakers, organizers, for this amazing gathering. And perhaps the current crisis has made it possible for more people to participate. Maybe that's part of the silver lining here. I'd like to begin by quoting one of my favorite poets, actually, a US feminist poet named Adrienne Rich. And she said in one of her poems, but there come times, perhaps this is one of them, when we have to take ourselves more seriously or die. We have to pull back from the incantations, rhythms we move to thoughtlessly, and disenthrall ourselves, bestow ourselves to silence or deeper listening, cleansed of oratory, formulas, choruses, laments, static, crowding the wires. We cut the wires and find ourselves in free fall. What if in this moment, we're full of experts, so-called experts. What if we were to admit that maybe we actually don't know enough about the current conditions, and we certainly don't know enough about the future? What if we admitted that we are deeply disappointed by all the efforts that we put in as movement people, all the efforts we've made that have not yielded what we believed our efforts would yield? So I just want to start with that question for us, in a way, to kind of make ourselves a bit more humble about what we know and understand, right? So I just want to put that out as a question. I also want to build on what Ebrima said. It's nice to see you again, Ebrima. I've met you at the first session, the first forum. I want to take up this question of what does it mean to be human in this moment, given everything that the human condition has done to us. And further, what does it mean to be a being among all beings? And Ebrima, you talked about that, decentering human life and really thinking about us among all beings. I think that the system we're living in right now, as others have spoken, was built over many centuries. So it's going to take a while to obviously transform the kinds of things that we're hoping we will transform, right? And as Ebrima also said, capitalism has ways of morphing so that it is able to sort of keep track of things and take the shape it needs to survive, and in some ways become more attractive to some people. And capitalism absolutely is working well, absolutely, for the few. And we know that. We've seen, somebody quoted the figure of how much money the first 3 weeks of COVID generated for wealth for a handful. I think this is an amazing time to be alive, right? In the US, what we're seeing, and I think it's happening globally, that there is a revitalization of social movements in ways that we haven't seen in the country in at least 40 years, if not more, 50 years. And that is the most recent manifestation, of course, is the movement for Black Lives, right? that is a result of state violence, etc. Right? It's a direct result of that, but it's also connected to two other recent movements that have really inspired us in the States. One, of course, is the Standing Rock movement of indigenous people fighting the pipeline. And the other is the Me Too movement, right? Where feminists said no more, around sexual violence and harassment. And so I think in the US, we have to put all three of those movements together and recognize also that these movements are built on the movements in the past. Thanks to the various ways that academic work has also, been able to be disseminated more into popular culture, people and activists, movement people are thinking about things in very multifaceted ways, right? So understanding the relationships, not just of gender, not just of race, et cetera, but the ways in which they all interact and reinforce manifestations of capitalism, deeply embedded in imperialism, colonization, colonialism. So there's a kind of a baseline, I think, theoretical understanding, right? We have analytic frameworks to understand better. I think there was also a comment made about the work of the intellectuals, and then those in the struggle. And I think, that we know very well that the intellectual and the activist work are not separable. In fact, we learn most when we're deeply engaged in the worlds around us. And so I'd like to reinforce that point. I think the movement for Black Lives most recently, has put out an amazing platform, right? Having said that, I think it's very important for those of us in the US to really think about our relationship to the nation state that in some ways gives us a certain kind of visibility, right? So that the movement for Black Lives or Black Lives Matter, that slogan can travel in so many directions around the world, but other slogans that are being used in other places, other concerns, are not broadcast here. And so in some ways, unless we are out in the world, so to speak, it's hard for us to really, in a deep way, make the connections, not just in terms of slogan. So for example, the day that George Floyd was murdered, the same day there was a young Palestinian man on whose neck the Israeli military had this Israeli army man had his foot. This guy had his foot on the young man's neck. Same kind of phenomenon, right? But that news doesn't spread as widely as it does the murder of George Floyd. And that absolutely has to do with being connected to the US nation state, US media, etc. Right? So that's something, that's a self-reflection, self-criticism, I think that we movement folks in the US have to think about. I think there's a whole movement here now about transformative justice, restorative justice, and going back also to an earlier point, there's been a debate here. The police officer who murdered Mr. Floyd, he should serve time. So one group of people is saying he should serve time. He should go to prison. He should go to jail, right? If we actually believe in transformative justice and restorative justice, what alternatives must we make available to him, the murderer, as well as to people in our own communities who have been murdered and imprisoned unfairly, etc. Right? So can transformative justice be just for one group of people, right? And I think we can learn a lot, I think, from the Zapatista struggle around this point. Going forward, I think something that I would really like to, emphasize are two things. One is love, and here I want to quote Arundhati Roy. She says, "To love, to be loved, to never forget your own insignificance, to never get used to the unspeakable violence and the vulgar disparity of life around you, to seek joy in the saddest places, to pursue beauty to its lair, to never simplify what is complicated or complicated what is simple, to respect strength, never power, above all to watch, to try and understand, to never look away, and never, never forget." So part of the Love Project is seeing the relationship between loving life in its very essence, all of life, and the being that I talked about before, and remembering, right? That we often invoke traditional cultures as sources of wisdom, right? We also know at the same time, because of colonialism and imperialism, much of that has been lost to many of us, right? And so part of the project of loving life is also remembering, right? Remembering the sacred, remembering what it means to be a being among beings. And, Ebrima said, and I said again, that capitalism has a way of morphing itself. And I think what capitalism has a wonderful way of doing is using its power, right? Using its influence to tap into human beings' deepest yearnings, right? So that buying a thing becomes love, right? Buying a thing becomes a way to gain respect. Materialism, is what I'm talking about. So if we are to really transform capitalist systems, I think we also have to attend to our own and other, people's lives who we care about. What is our deepest yearnings that propel us into particular directions, and specifically, in some ways, attaching ourselves to capitalist aspirations, right? To becoming rich, etc. Right? And so that's one thing. And I want to end here by talking about conspiracy. One of my very good comrades and very good friends, Reverend Deborah Lee, in one of her sermons, talked about this idea of conspiring. And in that sermon, she said, conspiring means to breathe together, to breathe together. And I also invoke here the quote that Frantz Fanon said, back. It's really appropriate for now, and put it together with this idea of conspiring. He said, when we revolt, it's not for a particular culture. We revolt simply because for many reasons we can no longer breathe. And you can take that, in a literal sense, as the current cases of both Corona and the murder of George Floyd, as well as in the sense of the way that Reverend Lee talked about conspiring, right? What could we create together if we actually started with the yearnings, all of our deepest yearnings, right? And we did that by breathing together, right? Collectively breathing, right? what kind of rhythms could we create if we were to breathe together? What kinds of imaginations could we unlock? How could we get in touch with our yearnings and therefore enable us to perhaps forget some of the things that we've been doing for a long time, right? And to say, we don't really know, right? But that because we're breathing together, we will figure out how to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margo. So I would like to call our last discussant, and she's Professor Jinhua. She's a professor at the Institute of Comparative Literature and Culture, and also director of the Center for Film and Cultural Studies at Peking University in China. She has authored more than 10 scholarly monographs and also has been translated into 8 or 10 languages. But we have her here today because she's been to Kerala, she's been to Chiapas, and actually we have traveled to many places in the different continents, trying to understand about alternatives.
很荣幸出席这个 panel 哈，这是一个在这个 panel 当中不只是我们将听到不只是来自于西欧、北美的声音哈，我们听到来自亚洲、非洲、拉丁美洲的声音，听到他们的思考，听到他们智慧的回应哈。我和前面的发言人有同感哈，就是一方面非常荣幸，但另外一方面觉得在Gustavo 的这个发言之后哈，我除了那个充满感动的认同之外哈，几乎没有什么新的想法哈可以去表述啊。我真的很想再次重述他的这个非常智慧的哈，同时又饱含情感和诗意的很多很多的洞察和观点比如说这样的一个僵尸和吸血鬼所联合统治的资本主义的世界，比如说这个资本主义对于未来的劫持就未来已被资本或者资本主义所劫持，比如说这个资本主义事实上已经死去或者至少已经在死灭之中，所有的这些个睿智的观察和表述都深深的在我内心唤起深深的呼应。那么作为一个回应人我又必须尽我的义务，所以我觉得今天我们南南论坛，或者说世界社会论坛，或者说反全球化运动，我们一直在思考、讨论和揭示全球资本主义的危机，而到今天，全球资本主义的危机以新冠疫情的方式，在我的感知之中，已经昭然若揭的展示在全世界全人类面前。但是同时，这样的一个展示本身又更深地揭示出今天世界的那个矛盾，就是一边是新冠疫情的全球流行，使得人类不再是一个抽象的概念，它成为一个人类共同面临的危机，成为一个无人可以自外、无人可以幸免、无人可以逃离的危机。但是从另外一边，我们看到回应全世界回应这个危机的方式是各种权力机构的自我加冕和自我强化，而所有这些权力机制所做的事情就是强化原有的壁垒，更为清晰地划定边界，然后希望用隔绝，希望用这个孤立来使自己逃离这样的一场劫难。 而这样的一个全球化所造成的灾难事实，这样的一个以瘟疫的病毒的全球化所向我们展示的全球化的事实，却同时因为全球资本、全球生产、全球物流的危机，或者说链条的断裂，而制造着世界上的多数、世界上的底层边缘人群、世界上的劳动者，他们的那个生存的、生命的最直接的困境。20世纪有2个著名的反面乌托邦作品啊，叫做《美丽新世界》和1984年。那么1984年描述着一个政治强权和仇恨政治和仇恨的这样的这个逻辑所统治的世界。美丽的新世界描述着一个技术专制、娱乐至死的世界。进入21世纪仅仅20年，我们已经体验了这2种恐怖的未来同时的成为我们现实的这样的一种全球结构。那么在这样的一种政治的、经济的，同时也是文化的这样的一个危机现实面前，我自己的那个困惑或者观察和思考在于，再一次的去告知资本主义处于危机之中，资本主义制造的灾难是不可能由资本主义自行消化和解决的。资本主义行将灭亡，但是人类能否在资本主义灭亡的疯狂当中幸存？人类能够在资本主义人类如何去建设一个资本主义之后的世界，才是更为急迫的问题。因为在我的观察之中，比如说充满了电影，世界各国的电影，世界各种类型电影当中的末日故事，比如说我正在阅读之中的在中国网络上连载的2部小说，都以那个世界已经处在倒计时的大毁灭之中。换句话说，在我的观察当中，资本主义必然终结，资本主义的终结必然伴随着一场大劫难的发生，是某种意义的共识。人们知道这个事实，人们已经不再需要被告知这样的事实。但是与此同时，他们接受或者自我催眠，让自己停留在一种对这个事实一无所知的状态之中。所以我把它称之为潜意识自觉，我也把它称之为可悲的犬儒主义。那么这种所谓可悲的犬儒主义，就是一个是我宁肯埋起头来，不想下一刻将有怎样的灾难发生，而另一种则是卑鄙地告知自己说，也许灾难发生，我将被豁免，我将幸存。或者人们告知自己说，即使我们知道，我们也无所作为，因为我们已经丧失了去想象资本主义之外的世界，资本主义之外的生活的动力、愿望和可能。 我们看21世纪的20年，较之20世纪的后半叶，一个最大的不同就是我们获知灾难，我们获知苦难，我们获知危机，我们获知问题，但是我们却丧失了在20世纪曾经为很多的人们所分享的那种急迫感，一种对于创造未来、争取未来的急迫感。所以我说Gustavo 的那个很准确的描述了这个现实，因为那个未来已经被劫持了。那么我想补充一句的是，那个未来也被资本主义、被僵尸们透支了。他们预知了我们的未来，他们预知了人类的未来，他们透支了人类的未来。那么在今天的中国，你会看到人们的彼此之间的隔绝，你会看到某一种冷漠，对苦难、对危机的冷漠和麻木。但同时你也看到一种普遍的焦虑，一种普遍的无望，一种普遍的无力感在蔓延。它也直接表现为在世界范围之内，忧郁症开始成为一种流行病。所以我只能延续前面的发言人的那个精彩的讨论，说我完全同意，当未来已经被透支的时候，那么也就意味着我们不可能去再度和资本主义争夺那个被他们透支的未来，我们不可能去赎回被劫持了的未来，我们必须去创造，必须去创造出一个未来。当年我们去墨西哥哈，我们去这个 Chiapas，我们去走了很多的墨西哥的很多地方，走了拉丁美洲的很多地方，走了非洲和亚洲的一些地方。我们之所以如此的认同和关注萨巴提斯塔运动，是因为萨巴提斯塔运动和其他的社会运动不同。尽管每一种社会运动都表现了他们的创造未来的活力，表现了他们的反抗强权、反抗压迫的活力，但是绝大多数的社会运动都仅仅是在现代化的理念的那个平等意义上，试图去追求那个曾经以欧洲的白男人为范本的人权，都仅仅是那样的一种分享资本主义的所创造的那样的一种人的神话的权利、地位或者生活方式。而萨巴提斯塔运动，他们第一次明确的在历史与现实之间，在过去与未来之间尝试搭建桥梁，一种在过去、在历史、在原住民的基层的文化当中去寻找重新创造未来、重新搭建另一个世界的可能、资源与可能。当然，置身在中国，置身在今天这个全球化最具活力的区域，也置身在有着沉重的传统文化的那个遗产，也是包袱的这样的一个世界当中。那么萨巴塔对我们的提示就不仅是关于历史与未来，而且是关于在历史、在过去 当中被压抑的、被封存的资源，如何可能被我们再次找到、再次激活、再次发现？那么最后我也还是想呼应或者重复 Margo 的这个讨论哈，就是我们如何能够再一次启动那份朴素的也是宝贵的人类情感，就是关于爱，关于对他人的爱，关于一个作为人而可能因为爱去体认，因为爱去获知，因为爱去携手。那么社区运动 Zapatista 运动对我们的另一个启示，正是我们如何重新恢复社会的有机性，重新恢复社群的有机性，重新建立起人与人之间真切的关系，如何重新去穿越民族国家的疆界，重新去跨过在种族、在性别、在阶级、在肤色的这些被资本主义、被殖民主义所建立起来的巨大的裂隙和巨大的这种隔绝之间，毫无疑问，反省人类中心主义是重要的和急迫的。但是，也许我们也可以再次的去定义人，再次去定义人类，再次在这样的一个意义上去重新召唤，重新去创造一个不同的未来，重新去夺回我们拥有未来的可能性。
Thank you, Professor Dai. Then now call on our two speakers to give to respond to the comments by the discussants. And since Sainath regretted that he didn't agree to speak first, so maybe this time I'll give you the chance, so you could be speaking first before Gustavo.
Oh, I think Gustavo should speak first. Yeah.
Okay, so it's up to you. Okay, so then Gustavo, would you like to speak first? Thank you.
Well, many things emerged in this very rich conversation, Kinchi. I will use forever the brilliant analogy presented by Sainath. It's really, really very effective to describe exactly what has been happening and is happening still today. We are fighting in many different ways, and we discussed this in presenting how we resist and how we fight the forces that oppresses us. But perhaps what I am getting is that apparently the dominant style of struggle today is to dismantle capitalism, one piece at a time, one step at a time. Through solidarity, through food justice, through many different ways, we are dismantling capitalism. Every time we put a seed in a pot in our home, we are dismantling capitalism. But we need to be aware that cultivating food at home is always very good, but we can be cultivating reactionary tomatoes or revolutionary tomatoes. If we cultivate food at home because it is the fashion and we buy our seeds and chemicals in the market and it is only for us, we are cultivating reactionary tomatoes. If the seeds are shared, and the seeds are in reality seeds for a new kind of community, we are cultivating revolutionary tomatoes. A few years ago, 4 years ago, we started in Mexico, in Unitierra, one specific exploration, one specific adventure was to discover around us collectives, communities that were trying to live in a radical challenge to the dominant system. that were already living in a kind of a new kind of world. And our surprise was to find them everywhere, not only among the Zapatistas. Everywhere we were finding collectives and communities doing that kind of radical challenge. And suddenly we discover through a friend that also was present in the forum, Ashish Kotari, that they were doing something similar in India with Bikal Samgam. And then we joined together with other friends, and then we started something that we call the Global Tapestry of Alternatives, and that we launched it in May 2019, a year ago. We are surprised at Kinchi, we are surprised at friends, that everywhere, all around the world, we are finding these alternatives, challenging the dominant system. And all of them are against patriarchy, against capitalism, against the nation state, against liberal democracy as a neo-colonial tool, against caste, against anthropocentrism, meaning the humans at the center of the universe. We are finding these alternatives everywhere, and we are thus nourishing the hope that we will be soon the critical mass needed for the change. Yes, we all know, and we discussed this today very clearly, that capitalism will not leave the scene peacefully. We know that. But we are furious enough, Kinchi, don't worry. We are furious enough. And then we have enough strength. And as Margo said, we will be able to breathe together. That is just what I wanted to say, Kinchi. Thank you.
I would have loved to hear you for another 60 minutes, but then for the time being, then we will move to Sainath.
Kinchi, I'll begin with the question you posed me. How does the fury convert into action? How does that fury convert into active protest? I would say that there is a tremendous deal of action and a tremendous deal of protest going on. It's very fragmented all over the world. It's very fragmented. It's in many cases isolated. How do we marry the different radical energies together? That, I think, is a gigantic challenge. But let me tell you, say, some of the kinds of protests that have been taking place, and some of the forms of protest, in my opinion, are very tragic, but the great ones. In an ongoing agrarian crisis in India, now 25 years and still on, we saw something absolutely stupendous in 2018, when 40,000 of the forest farmers, I mean indigenous people, Adivasis of mainly the Warli tribes and a few other tribes, absolutely crushed by the debt burden, crushed on the land issue where their land was classified forest land and they were not given title to it. 40,000 of them, it started with 3,000, 40,000 of them marched from a town called Nashik in Maharashtra. They marched 182 kilometers in 40 degrees heat, barefoot, not for fun, but because they cannot afford footwear. They are that poor. 40,000 of them marched 182 kilometers over hills and valleys and mountains to reach Mumbai. And they did that in 6 days. And for the first time in 36 years of being based in Mumbai, I saw this extremely commercial city and its middle classes turn out in thousands to greet the marchers. Something happened that day. it led to the creation of a non-farmer forum called Nation for Farmers. Students, teachers, lawyers, doctors. Doctors left their hospitals and came and set up a mini clinic at the major protest center to treat those farmers whose feet were bleeding. And it was astonishing, moving, and a few months later, just a few months later in November, well over 100,000 farmers marched on the capital city of Delhi, and they were there representing 22 states in this country, 3 union territories. It was a massive show, and the second time we saw this in Delhi, the second march, thousands of very young upper middle class students also came out of their colleges. They came at 4 a.m. in the morning to receive the marchers, went off at 7 a.m. to write their exams at 9 a.m., came back at 2 p.m. and served as food distribution volunteers to the 100,000 people who had assembled. Things are happening, have been happening. But I'm saying the scale, how do you marry the different protests going on? How do you build that common ground? It's incredibly more complex when you get down to it. It's incredibly complex in societies divided on so many lines, ethnic, racial, caste. It's very difficult. Second, I really want to say that, again, maybe this is my bias as a media person or a journalist, but I don't think we engage enough or contest enough the incredibly corrupting, devastating role of corporate media. You know, the largest brainwashing apparatus in history, okay? The greatest apparatus of brainwashing in history. And, you know, let's just look back 20, 25 years, the romancing of the internet. The internet would liberate you. Never mind that every other medium in history from Gutenberg onwards was also meant to liberate us, right? And including, I remember that the sociologist Raymond Williams announced that radio would liberate humankind. That was 2 years before Hitler's Berlin broadcasts, right? So you have had that, but in the romantic of the internet was that it gave everybody a voice. Well, it did give you a voice. It did guarantee that anyone would listen to you. That it did. The same monopolies have also occupied that space. I keep repeating, the fight in our time, one of the central battles is the fight against corporate power. Okay, so you look at 4 companies that actually monopolize the internet, and their level and scale of monopoly is greater than you will find in almost any other industry in the world. Okay, 73% of all search, Google. 82% of all email, Microsoft, Apple, Google. 68% of all online auction in the world, eBay, and so on and so forth. The levels of monopoly are unprecedented. And I keep begging people to pay attention to this for one more reason. These monopolies are different from all monopolies in history in one way. These guys own your personal data. They sell and trade your data. I call them human data traffickers. Okay? The astonishing power of Facebook and the damage it's doing has compelled something like the United States Congress to have hearings about it. But it's very difficult to undo. In the fights that we have for justice, in, and look at this. I mean, if you look at the 30-year period, it's the media that have actually changed the meaning of fundamental words. Today, in much of the world, land reform, which is, I think, the most dearest thing to my heart, today land reform means freeing agricultural land to hand over to corporations. That is the word, that's how land reform as a word is now used in much of the media across the planet. I think how I'm really trying to think, and then the so-called social media, which also is a huge bunch of monopolies. How do we tackle this? How do we pay attention to it? How do we work that fight, that battle into our other battles for justice? How do we fight the land issue and keep this in? Because you have a huge apparatus talking to the public of a nation or society, the globe, telling them exactly the opposite of the truth. How do we build that challenge? So the other thing is that if you look, the contradictions have started showing. I think we lost a very major battle in the 90s with the IPR regimes that came in with the WTO. We lost very major battles. But now those battles are set to be fought again because you're going to have those huge fights over the patenting on whatever vaccines come up to fight COVID. You're going to have gigantic profiteering. And already, I mean, the US is already pouring money into private companies in that battle, including one company that has never brought a drug to market, never brought a product to market. But they're being given, I think, billions of dollars. It's a much more complex battle than it was, yet many of the new battles will be pretty much like the old battles with huge complications on. We still have, say, in India to fight the battles of land reform, land redistribution, which have only happened in 3 or 4 states in this country, and a gigantic part of it has come on. We are now going to have to fight, look, everyone in the world is going to have to contend with this huge corporate rush to make money out of online education, which is leading to the exclusion of tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of poor students all over the world. Okay? We are doing, in the government of India and the state governments are going in for online education. How many kids between age 5 and 16 own a smartphone? In India's Silicon Valley, Karnataka, of which Bangalore is the capital, 2% of rural households own computers, 8% have had any access to the internet. Those new inequalities, I really think we need to pay attention to media and corporate monopolies, whether in media or out of it. And how do we build mass movements and have mass actions in the time of COVID? Yeah, I mean, these are the things that I think we're all struggling with. And I'm also going to say there is a new hunger crisis on the anvil. It's come with the lockdowns, which have destroyed livelihoods, left hundreds of millions of people with no income at all, no access to healthcare. How do we think about this? How do we visualize fighting the battles against hunger? That's why I had said food, health, education. How do we start building across the world, across marginalized peoples, to add these renewed battles to the old battles? Thank you.
Thank you. Although, well, this is a different form of face-to-face encounter that we have, because we really face each other now on the screen. And I'm also also very happy that actually when we planned this forum 9 months ago, I wrote to Gustavo to invite him to come to Hong Kong, so that we could be physically together. And of course, this is not possible this time. But still, I feel that despite all the constraints, with this from our speakers tonight, the kind of gentle fury, the kind of quiet passion, the deep love have come across, have reached us across all these to touch us. And I would like to end by quoting the Minamata Declaration. That was the people's movement in 1989, where I think about 100,000 people were mobilized within Japan, and also were invited to, some of them, and were invited to come to Japan to talk about the question of pollution, of the mercury poisoning, of the plight of the farmers, of the indigenous, of the women. And that was the People's Plan for the 21st Century movement. And I look at the declaration again, and what is the declaration that was written in August 1989 said at the beginning. It said, the slogan at the beginning of the 20th century was progress. The cry at the end of the 20th century is survival. The call for the next century is hope. And I think now, 31 years later, we are still faced with the same situation of struggling for survival. And yet, I think the key word of hope is there. The word of love is there. And from the People's Plan of the 21st century, then we set out to try to build an alliance of hope. And that was what we called the Alliance of Hope. So I feel that now, especially from tonight, it has been so inspiring, and the passion has come across. And I feel that we need to have all these furies so that we can be, we can have all the energy to build this alliance, to build and to reinvigorate this alliance of hope. And thank you so much. Thank you so much to our two speakers. Thank you to our discussants and all our participants.